Time is running out for the United States to negotiate new trade deals with the world. President Donald Trump's self-imposed 90-day deadline will end in a few weeks. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. US President Trump announced hefty tariffs on dozens of countries and territories on April 2nd and almost immediately paused them for 90 days to give them time to negotiate. A promise of 90 deals in 90 days has been hard to achieve. Well, a month from now, on July 9th, the levies will come into effect on 89 countries. Britain was the only one so far to sign a trade deal with the United States. We begin with this report from Nick Harper.
Well, the clock is counting down. We're now 2/3 of the way through the 90-day pause, and so far there's been very little progress. In early April, Donald Trump announced his Liberation Day tariffs, a 10% baseline tariff on all countries, along with reciprocal tariffs of up to 50%, depending on how large the country's trade deficit was with the United States. But then, just a few days after that, he paused those tariffs, announcing a 90-day freeze, giving countries time to negotiate bilateral trade arrangements with the United States as a way to try and avoid those huge import duties. The White House promised it would do 90 deals with 90 countries in 90 days. However, 60 days into that 90-day window, and the Trump administration has only managed to announce one bilateral trade agreement with the United Kingdom. And even that is just a preliminary deal, which is not yet fully ratified. So to keep its promise, the Trump administration is now looking to do another 89 deals in just 30 days to beat that July deadline. As a way to accelerate negotiations with dozens of countries this week, the US requested best and final offers from its trade partners. The White House also this past week said it was making very good progress on various negotiations, adding it was close to the finish line on a couple of deals. The White House also says it does not plan to extend the 90-day pause, even if deals are not finalized. Nick Harper, CGTN, Washington.
It's time to bring in our panel. Here in our studio, Otaviano Canuto is Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South and former Vice President of the World Bank. Sourabh Gupta is Senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist at the Institute for China-America Studies. From Beijing, Qiang is Assistant Director of the International Monetary Institute. Also from China, in Kunshan, Quelch is Vice Chancellor at Duke Kunshan University. Welcome to all of you. Otaviano, when President Trump announced those tariffs on April 2nd, Liberation Day as it was called, he said this will force our trade partners to come to the negotiating table for us to get better deals. He promised, as we just heard, 90 deals in 90 days. But 2 months have gone by. He signed one deal, just that one, that preliminary deal with the United Kingdom. So what's the status of this tariff regime right now?
Well, nobody knows for sure. That's the problem, the levels of uncertainty that has been installed. Because on the one hand, of course, there is the theory that the objective of those tariffs announced is primarily, to negotiate, escalate, to de-escalate, but at the same time, enacting treaties with so many countries in such a short time, it is not something that one can imagine as feasible. The most likely scenario, I would say, will be, in most cases, simulation of a negotiation that would allow Mr. Trump to reduce the tariffs overall to something close to 10%, which are already higher than the ones that prevailed before him. So at the end of this process, I estimate that he will succeed in lifting the tariffs, but not necessarily to the agonic levels that we saw on the Liberation Day. One issue, important issue to take into account is the following. He has been challenged legally.
Yes.
Yes, okay, the process is. But that was regarding the reciprocal tariffs, on those on the Liberation Day. The ones on sectors, on aluminum, steel, as well as the ones on China, they do not resort to the so-called Emergency Economic Powers Act.
Yeah.
So they can sustain, and those sectors, the sector ones. But overall, most estimates point out to something like an effective tariff rate on average around 15%, which is a lot higher than what they were.
But on those steel tariffs, the aluminum tariffs as well, there have been complaints from U.S. business leaders as well.
It's true, because, see, all these tariffs, as they impact intermediate goods, everyone that uses them will feel the impact of higher costs, higher price, less competitiveness, and so on. So even if there is some import substitution associated with the tariffs in the sectors, everyone who uses those products as inputs will feel the impact. And in some cases, let me give you just one example. Brazil. The steel sold by Brazil in the U.S. is mostly semi-finished goods that are worked here by other steel companies. And is not a direct competitor to the steel production here. So any trade measures such as those, they even though they may offer apparently a protection to the production in the specific segments, everybody else in the economy suffers the impact of that, including the U.S. exports. That's why economists generally do not see the use of tariffs as an effective policy instrument.
And it affects the strangest of sectors. I read today that canned foods are going to go up in price because there's steel used in the manufacture of cans. I never knew that. Sourabh Gupta, you know, when President Trump made this announcement on April 2nd, he very, let's say, optimistically said that the countries are going to be lining up to make deals with the United States on trade. But would it be fair to say that not many countries are exactly lining up with begging bowls for a better deal with the U.S.?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, yeah, they're not lining up for deals. And the reason is, within that very first week when he imposed those tariffs, announced those tariffs, the bond market came and slapped him back. I think 30-year bonds had their single largest rise, weekly rise in 30 years, or since 1987. So immediately financial markets went against him and chastened him. On top of that, you know, I think the way, of course, as was just talked about, he has lost a very important court ruling, and which was very well argued why these tariffs cannot and should not be sustained. And while he has some workarounds where he can impose temporary 15% tariffs for 150 days, but which need to be renewed, these are not exactly reciprocal tariffs. So, I mean, things are up. Countries have seen this. Markets are punishing him. Consumers are anxious and nervous. And the court system is challenging him. And so they realize, I mean, we just don't have to lay down out there in front of Trump. And for the fact of the matter is, most country tariff levels are actually very low. And that's what the administration is finding out. And that's why it's trying to reframe this as, oh, but there are non-tariff barriers and we go after that. But negotiating behind the border barriers are so much more difficult. And so, yes, that is the circumstance. They're coming to reality that this is not going to be as a cakewalk as they thought. And then countries are not just going to roll over.
Right. All right, let me go to John Quelch. John, good to see you. You know, we just heard from Sourabh about what happened in the bond market, but there have also been warnings from American business leaders on what these tariffs are doing to the U.S. economy. There was JP Morgan Chase CEO, Jamie Dimon, who said that the tariffs will weaken the United States economy and there could be a sell-off on the stock market. But beyond that, I mean, how are these tariffs affecting the rest of the globe?
Thanks, Anand. Regarding the U.S., certainly the bond market warning sign of a couple of weeks ago, very, very important, and that more than anything else, I think, brought us back from the brink and had the result of the renegotiation of the China-US tariff levels back to where they are today. As far as the stock market is concerned in the United States, I feel that that is being buoyed at the moment by the promise of the tax cuts, especially on businesses in the Big Beautiful Bill, as it's called. On the other hand, we have the Federal Reserve Chairman still talking up inflation as likely to be at 3% as opposed to the previous expected 2.1%. So interest rates remaining high, the spread between the US interest rate and the European Central Bank is as large as it's been for some time. And that, of course, is not helping President Trump, who would rather like to see the interest rates come down to further boost the economy. But the prospect of inflation that is emanating from these tariff wars is holding up the Fed from further reducing the rate of interest. And so, in a sense, the administration in Washington is shooting itself in the foot as far as the tariff policy is concerned.
And what about the impact globally, John? I think there was a revision, if I remember correctly, by the IMF not so long ago. It was a revision downwards on global growth.
Certainly, global growth is obviously going to be affected by the inflationary impact of the tariffs, the dislocations of traditional international trade patterns, supply chain disruption. All of those elements contribute to a lowering in growth. If I may just say one thing, Anand, on the tariff negotiations, I believe that the elephant in the room here is really the China-US relationship. And I think many countries are taking a cue from China and standing by. They may have some idea as to what their negotiating position might finally be, but they're really waiting to see if the China-US agreement can be reached before they commit themselves, because so much of the international trade flow depends upon what happens between China and the US. If there's restriction on that flow, then Chinese exports will flow off potentially into other markets. And I think, therefore, that many countries, rather than making bilateral deals, as the UK did early in the game, are standing by waiting to see how the US-China relationship plays out.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's look at what's going on in China. Qiang, there have been some very strong numbers that actually came out of China. Exports to the United States, let me start with that first. They did fall. They fell in May compared to May of last year, but total exports to the world grew by 4.8%. So what does this tell us about China's resilience to these higher tariffs?
And we have to understand that this all over fuss about the tariff wars has been affecting the Chinese export towards America, especially compared to the data of the last year. So we think Trump's, all kinds of the policies actually been affecting not only the international trade, disrupting the free trade, but also I think affecting Americans' living standard, because the less import from China actually means, well, less groceries, less services, products into the United States of America. And also, there is a very funny factor into the data. If you dig it deeper, we will find out actually we were thinking actually the inflation rate in April and May in the United States probably going to go very, very high, because if you take a look at the shelf prices, probably lots of the groceries are growing like 30% or 20%, and some medicines are even growing at like double the prices. But the overall CPI numbers, the headlines, actually are not growing that much. Probably, well, we're looking at more than 3%, but basically still 2.5%. So what's the reason behind that? It means actually less people are buying less things. That's the reason why the price is not going as much as we expected. So it shows that the living standard in America is not very much growing. Well, secondly, about China's trade structures, ever since like 5 years ago, United States is already not the Chinese #1 trade partners, not like 20 years ago. Instead, I think the global South nations are replacing America because major trade partners with China. It shows that, the whole international trade pivot point has been shifting. Just take a look. ASEAN nations, they have 600 million people. Latin American have 600 million people. If you include, South Asian, if you include African and Middle Asian. So I think the whole growing market and the emerging market has been larger and larger in this, past 10 years. So it shows that if America are not paying attention to the shifting of the international trade weight, and I think the whole economic center of the whole world is probably going to be very, very different after 10 years or even 20 years.
Otaviano, John mentioned the current round of negotiations taking place in London right now. It's a second round of negotiations. It also comes after that telephone call between President Trump and President Xi Jinping of China. Do you get the sense now that there is some level of urgency to come to a resolution, to settle this?
Yes, yes. And I believe that the tit for tat will take place around promise on the Chinese side about rare earth and against promise from the US side with respect to semiconductors. Right. I guess that's why I'm optimistic with respect to a deal being reached. Right. Well, you may recall last time I came here, right after the spring meetings of the World Bank and IMF, when Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, during an event, himself said that the way things were going were unsustainable. And immediately afterwards, we had, and by the way, we know that authorities from China and himself met at the IMF. Right. I worked there many years. There was a tunnel I crossed by coincidence when they were getting together. So the will on the American side to reach a deal embodied by Mr. Bessent, contrasting with the, let's say, more protectionist, isolationist part of Mr. Trump's government, bodes well in that regard. But even so, we shouldn't be naive and keep in sight that at the end of the day, there will be a higher level of tariffs, which tends to, according to the meeting in Geneva, hover around something close to 30% of tariffs on Chinese products and 10% from the Chinese side on the US products. Right. So at the end of the day, this process will lead to the US economy living with a higher tariffs, much higher tariffs than where they were.
But would those not be tempered by the fact that there are concerns about inflation?
Yes, but at the same time, see, John set up his forecast. I myself am working as of today, looking at the way by which things are happening, with a forecast of 3.5% inflation rate. The point is that the bulk of the impact of tariffs has not come yet. Yes. And there is something that may deceive, which are the statistics about the GDP growth in the first months of the year. Why is that? Because in anticipation of the tariffs, there was a lot of front loading of purchase and productions and so on. So you look at the figures of GDP, and you look immediately behind the wall, see how resilient is the US economy. But when you look at the leading indicators, you realize that at the margin, there is a deceleration, as John aptly said. We can see in several indicators. So it's a moment of transition that we're living through. And,
Okay, let me go to John again. John, one of the reasons President Trump gave when he made this announcement, in fact, he's been saying this for several months, even before announcing those tariffs, that he wants manufacturing industry to come back to the United States, reshoring as it's called. But given the enormous infrastructure that would be needed and the time it would take, is that realistic?
It's, I think, not realistic. the length of time it takes to construct factories from scratch, the length of time to train labor that may have 10 years ago been in manufacturing but has migrated to other areas of endeavor. All of this cannot be flicked on like a switch. On the other hand, there is a tremendous entrepreneurial spirit in the United States, and I think the speed with which the United States can get things done, if there's high levels of motivation coming from Washington, is probably greater than most of us would normally expect. And so the answer to your question, Anand, is somewhere between the normal level of delay that you would imagine that would be very difficult to sustain, but on the other hand, probably a faster response time than we would expect in the normal course of events. This is, after all, the country that was able to, through Operation Warp Speed, develop a COVID vaccine in an amazingly short length of time. So I think the answer to your question is somewhere between it's going to be a long time and it's going to be overnight.
Sourabh, we've talked about reshoring on previous shows before, but if we look at some of the previous efforts, I mean, during his first term, Trump's first term, there were 1,000 new jobs were created in the steel industry, but there was a loss of 75,000 jobs by mid-2019 overall. Could we have the same thing happen again?
We could have the same thing happening because he had those Steel 232 national security tariffs, and those were the findings. It did create a small amount of jobs in upstream industries, and it canceled out, lost a lot of jobs downstream. Right. And I think the administration is getting a little smarter. What it does want to do is, of course, nearshoring is out, friendshoring is out. Now it's all about reshoring. But they're beginning to understand, even in terms of reshoring, you have to be selective in terms of going in industrially salient sectors. They've merged economic security with national security. Yes. And so they are perhaps willing to take extra job losses in the name of national security, but how wide that perimeter of national security is will determine how unwise the level of policy is. At this point of time, it seems very unwise, but I think they're trying to winnow it down, and we'll just have to see. But they are in the process of multiple national Section 232 national security investigations on things like, I mean, lumber. I mean, is that national security? But whatever. But they have lots of those. And so, you know, overall, we'll have to see where this reshoring business goes on. Obviously, they cannot compete with the Vietnams of the world, and they shouldn't want to compete with the Vietnams of the world. But if they can winnow it down to economically and strategically salient and industrially salient sectors and have a lighter touch, maybe there might be something to say for these tariffs.
Yeah, if I may just say one thing very briefly, corroborating what he's saying. When Scott Bessent speaks, he sounds like more people from the Biden's time, because in the case of Biden, you had the policies geared at semiconductors, on clean energy, very focused, and so on, selective. So the word was de-risking, not decoupling.
Right, right.
And so we should pay attention. And one important thing is the following. An illusion has been sold. There is no way the old industry of Detroit can be relived, because technology has changed, and the kind of job creation that would come with this new round of import substitution is not going to be as intensive and of the same nature as in the past. So there's an illusion that has been sold.
Qiang, what is your view on what could come out of these negotiations in London? I mean, what are expectations, and what kind of leverage does China take to the negotiations? I mean, there's been a lot of talk recently about the Chinese almost monopoly on the production of rare earth minerals.
Well, and actually, during this talk, according to my source, that China is going to talk to the United States, try to, return to what's happening before the Trump administration, return to the old regime of taxation arrangement between China and the United States. So I think the whole deal is that it will be reciprocal. If America quit all kinds of the extra levy taxation, China will also going to quit all kinds of what we call the targeted restrictions. For example, on the rare earths. For example, on certain kind of the technologies and equipment. So let's say Boeing airplanes. Well, rumor has it China has already come back to the normal purchase of the Boeing airplanes and also some other electronics and also mechanics like that. So if American will back down and China will also back down, I think the whole hope is that the Chinese leadership really wants to just restore the normal order for the global trade so that everything can just run smoothly especially against the current economic sentiment all over the globe. So I think that's the whole idea. And plus, also, they are going to probably have some other talks over some political, arrangement, internationally. So that's the whole idea. But don't take it wrong. China is not going to be back off softly. If American is also going to play the strong hand on China, say, okay, I'm going to give you some other hard deals, so you have to accept that. Otherwise, we're going to have you some even more things, like what Trump has done before. I don't think China is going to buy that. That is a done deal. So let's see what's going to happen out of the London, because I think everybody is missing the point that the whole thing has been changed. China is not the one selling T-shirts and toys anymore. If you raise up the tariff, China is going to back off. No, China is more like Japan, like 1980s, or European Union, like 1990s. China is an export of both products, high-end products, and also capitals. So that's the reason why Chinese economy is stable and resilient after all these turbulence. Plus, we have the global South market. So I think this is the thing that American authorities on monetary and fiscal, they really have to think about.
Okay. John, very quickly, I've only got less than a minute left. Next week, the G7 summit will take place. It will take place in Canada. In fact, the Canadians have invited the Mexican president to the G7 summit as well. How important is this meeting going to be?
Well, I think it gives an opportunity for Canada and Mexico to come together. The USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, was negotiated actually and finalized by President Trump in his first term and is up for renewal in 2026. So in the context of the current tariff contentious negotiations between Canada and the U.S. and Mexico and the U.S., this is quite an important meeting. If I can, just very quickly, I want to say that I'm very optimistic about the restoration of momentum in London. And the reason is that the Commerce Secretary of the U.S., Howard Lutnick, is now part of the negotiating team. And his Chinese counterpart is also there.
Okay, John, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt you. We have run out of time. We are going to have to leave it there. Thank you to all of you for being with us. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.